Welcome to today's podcast on our Future of Insurance Industry Leaders series. And today I'm really happy to have Chris Cheatham, the CEO and founder of RiskGenius, join us for today's podcast. And it has been a pleasure getting to know Chris over the last few years. And we've spent quite a bit of time lately doing a few webinars, conversations together. So Chris, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I can't get enough, so I'm back.
No, that's great. So why don't you give a little background on yourself? I know a lot of people know you in the industry, but give some interesting perspectives on your background and what you're doing at RiskGenius around insurance and innovation.
So my name is Chris. Like you mentioned, I'm the CEO of RiskGenius here in Overland Park, Kansas. I'm a recovering attorney. I used to represent insurance companies in large construction and surety disputes. And so as part of that process, I learned a lot about messy claim documents. And so in 2012, we originally launched our company to do claim document management. As boring as it sounds, but I had the entrepreneurial bug at that point. While we were working, a carrier approached us and said, "Hey, we like your software. Could we use this for policy review?" And I still remember that conversation. I'll never forget it because I very naively said, "Sure, what's policy review?" Yeah, so I started whiteboarding literally in that. It was like it's kind of one of those startup stories where I was getting ready to go pitch some investors about the claim document management. And then I'm whiteboarding outside the pitch room these new ideas for policy review. And so as we studied the problem, we came to realize that the insurance industry really struggled to know what was in their insurance policies. You have insureds who frankly just don't look at their policies very often. You have the brokers who are trying to manage policies from dozens, if not hundreds of carriers. And then you have the carriers who have thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of forms, depending on the size of the company. And so understanding the content of all that information is very difficult. And so when we launched in 2015 with RiskGenius, the goal was to basically organize the world's insurance policy data and information. And so here we are. It's 2020. The world looks a lot different now than it did back in 2015, that's for sure.
Oh boy, isn't it? From that initial kind of vision that you had of RiskGenius, where it really started out at claims and it evolved into a much bigger picture with policy review and all of the policy forms. One of the things that you've done really well is really kind of adapt along the way, kind of adapt and learned. And as you worked with your customers, seeing where what you built could really kind of serve a broader goal and a broader need in the industry. What advice would you give to both, traditional insurers or other startups, about that adaptation? And how do you see that being able to adapt really quickly as a key element of how the industry really needs to kind of change on a more regular basis than what we have in the past?
Yeah, I think you have to listen very, very closely to your customer, whoever that customer is. And I think just generally the world kind of struggles with that at this point.
Yeah.
And so when we went into building insurance technology, particularly the policy review, I was a blank slate. Our company was a blank slate because we didn't know anything about it. And so I just did what I knew to do, which was just listen very intently, take lots of notes, write down, ask lots of questions. It probably helps that my dad was in the insurance industry for 40 years. And so I have a high regard for insurance. I didn't have a view that, oh my gosh, this is a broken system that has to be torn up and you got to start over. I think that a lot of innovation, frankly, is incremental and I still have not, by the way, seen that idea that's going to blow up the whole industry. And so if you're going to do incremental improvements, you have to listen very closely and understand the problems that the customer has. And that required, and that's not just me, but our entire organization has to listen very intently to our customers and learn from them and then build solutions into the software as we go.
I think that's a really insightful perspective because I think that's one of the things that I have come to really appreciate about many of the insurtechs, whether it's, solution providers like yourselves or maybe some of the actual MGA or insurance company startups. They really took a different approach. Many of them came with a blank slate, not really having a deep understanding of the industry, and they came from the customer perspective, an outside-in view. And so they approached it with a completely different mindset that I think has really impacted and influenced the overall industry over these last 6 years of InsurTech. How do you see that going forward? Do you think people are going to continue to listen to that outside in view, particularly as we find ourselves kind of in a hunker down mode right now?
I mean, you have to if you're going to survive, right? The problems that we were solving 3 months ago are not the problems that need solved now. And there's this other idea that I remember the first 2 weeks of kind of the pandemic, and I was thinking about InsurTech, and kind of the phrase that popped in my head is innovation theater is over. You know, I think you're going to see a lot of, frankly, InsurTechs go away. You're going to see conferences go away. You're going to see pilots that had no real purpose go away. And instead, it's going to be about solving real problems, which I'm all for, because that's kind of where we've been as a company since the beginning.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to see quite a bit of M&A, and, you know, those that have really good solutions or really good ideas, I think investors are going to double down on those.
Yep, I would agree with that.
So why is RiskGenius so different and more powerful than what insurers have used in the past? Talk about it a little bit.
In the past, insurers have used PDFs or Microsoft Word documents, and then they create those documents and then they push them to the customer. And then the documents just reside in a document management system, like a SharePoint system. As a result, when you need to understand the content of those documents in a very detailed fashion, it's problematic. COVID-19 was a great example where we had, you know, in the industry had to respond to regulatory requests very quickly around what's in your policies. And it got down to exactly what we knew was important, you know, clause by clause. Do you have a exclusion for virus? Do you have business interruption coverage? Which one's going to prevail, et cetera? And we had a customer, one of my favorite stories, and I'm not going to disclose their name because there's all sorts of issues around these regulatory requests, but we had a customer who was able to go through their policies in an hour and figure out the answers and then just be done with it. And what was really funny is I emailed them like 2 weeks, the week that the regulatory request came out. So I was about a week late, and I said, hey, do you need help with this? And they said, oh no, we did that like 3 weeks ago. We're already done. I was like, okay, you're gonna have to explain that one to me. So it was exactly what I had always hoped for with this software, which is people just are able to find their answers very quickly in these policies. And it came to fruition. So that was a great story. And I think a lot of the industry has gotten caught flat-footed on this topic, which is kind of understanding the content of your insurance policies, because just so much has been put into the sales and distribution of products, and the insurance policies themselves have been almost secondhand in the process.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point, and it's actually, it really it becomes the moment of truth for customers, because what's in or out of those policies really defines what that experience is going to be for a customer based on what their expectations were going in and what they thought that they bought. So having it a lot more transparent, you and I talked about transparency of policy language and making it kind of readable to the novice, so to speak. I think this is just the first step in that direction. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. And we were seeing, you know, customers and prospects talking about integrated insurance policies even before COVID-19. So an integrated insurance policy is where you start doing away with forms and endorsements, and you just have one policy, one document. And so it's much easier to read and understand. The idea of forms and endorsements really is an archaic solution. It was created because people had to mail in documents to insurance commissioners for approval. I like to always think about the first person that ever mailed in a form to an insurance commissioner, and then they wake up the next day and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to edit that. What do I do? And so like an endorsement gets born at that point, right? Now that we're doing this all digitally, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like if I wrote an email and then every time I wanted to edit that one email, I had to attach a Word document to edit the main content of the email. Like, that's just not how things work anymore.
It's a great example where we just continue to apply technology to old business processes without really stepping back and saying, does it even make any sense in today's world? And more importantly, does it even make sense from the customer's perspective? As you're thinking about the future of insurance, and where we are today and where it could possibly be, what are you guys doing to prepare for that, and how you're going to help your customers prepare for that?
Yeah, so we focused a lot on a product that we call emerging risks. So that's taking a insurance portfolio, tens of thousands of policies or hundreds of thousands of bound policies, and being able to go through them very quickly for a particular issue so that you can figure out your exposure. Typically, those risks are going to be things that emerge after the policies have been written, after they've been bound. So we tend to see there tends to be more of these risks starting to bubble up. I personally think it's because of the environment for the storytelling around these issues. So, you heard a lot in the media about opioids litigation. We've heard a lot about silent cyber, and now we're hearing a lot about COVID-19. In the future, we'll hear a lot about climate change. And so it's these issues that emerge that you have to go back and evaluate your policies for, because you didn't contemplate those issues when you wrote the policies. And so we've actually it's one of the highlights of this very difficult quarantine process for everyone, including our company, was our data science team figured out how to automate that emerging risk product so that we can just go through a portfolio, automatically extract all the information that we need, and you're on your way. And every time I see it, it astounds me. And so that is a huge step. And I think that type of analysis is going to be very important, because right now it's almost unsustainable how many of those reviews have had to happen in the last, there's people still trying to do silent cyber reviews right now. And now they're putting COVID-19 reviews on top of that. And something probably will pop up in the next 2 to 3 years. And COVID litigation is not going away in 2 to 3 years. Figuring this stuff out in a more sustainable, scalable way is going to be very important. We think our emerging risk product's important for that.
Yeah, I agree. So that really kind of leads into this whole focus on technology, particularly a shift to, platforms that provide access to data, new data sources, AI, machine learning, up in the cloud, all of those types of things, and being a part of an ecosystem, which you guys are part of an ecosystem, to be able to, work with other solutions. I think coming out of this, I think there's going to be a real acceleration in use of some of those technologies. And I think your example of what your data scientists did, I think we've hardly even touched the surface of what analytics can do with the data that we've got, or the information that we've got inside insurance companies that can really be impactful for our customers. What are your thoughts about where technology is going to be heading into the future here?
So I think a lot about the unstructured data that reside within the insurance company, and just it's everywhere. Right? Emails, think about all of the knowledge and information in emails and all the problems that it causes for the insurance industry. I would argue that errors within all insurance policies, just simple errors that get created between bind, quote, and issue, those errors are so painful, particularly when they get big. And that's one of the most important problems to solve. And a lot of the information to solve those is in emails. So what's going to happen with the email? What's going to happen with the policies? What's going to happen with the forms? That to me within the insurance companies is so interesting. How do you start structuring this data? And we're barely scratching the surface. I don't think about the external data as much, but I think there's some really interesting stuff around that too. I was contacted actually recently by a company that does equipment rentals, and they want to start taking their data that they have around those equipment rentals and turning it into an insurance product, so that people not only can use their insurance for their rental, but they could also use the insurance for just their equipment generally. Mm-hmm. Because this company thinks they have better data and they probably do, because they have just pure data on what happens with the equipment that's rented through their company. So I think there's a lot of this now are looking at what can we do with our data to help maybe improve insurance products. So that's another trend. We're not involved with that at RiskGenius, but I think it's a really interesting trend.
I think it's really down to personalized risk products. Is what you're getting, is what it really talks about.
Yeah, we think about that from the policy standpoint too, right? Why is it that every small business gets a particular insurance policy from one carrier, or a very similar policy? Why can't those policies start to have what I consider the Lego blocks approach to building an insurance policy? We're in Kansas. We have a hurricane exclusion on one of our policies. I'm pretty sure we're not going to get a hurricane in Kansas. And so That just stuff like that, like it makes the policies harder to read, harder to understand. Frankly, we're probably getting priced for that, hurricane exclusion or not getting priced for it. That's the type of stuff that I think needs to be adjusted going forward. One of my favorite stories is a policy I saw like last year that had a Y2K exclusion still attached to it. I
Oh
don't think
my.
that's not relevant anymore, pretty sure.
Oh my gosh, 20 years later.
Yep. Yep.
Wow. How many policies would you guess would probably have exclusions that were, 5, 10, 20, 30 years old? There's probably a lot sitting out there.
Well, all of them have exclusions that are 5, 10, 20 years old because the language was written that long ago,
Uh-huh.
right? Like that's part of the reason why it's so hard to understand is because you just add layer upon layer upon layer on these policies. And eventually, because there's legal precedent, it does make sense from a legal precedent standpoint. I think there's the word chattel, for example, is oftentimes in policies. I can't remember what that means, right? Like I don't even remember. So it just, I don't know. It's crazy. I understand how it happened, and that's really helpful because now I can be empathetic to the current solutions. But at the same time, we have to realize that there probably is a better solution going forward.
So with that, it kind of ties into kind of one of the questions I like to ask everybody on our podcast is, where do you see insurance over the next 3 to 5 years?
Ooh, it's going to get dicey, I think. I'm just giving my real response. I think it's going to get dicey. And I think it's going to hinge on, and I'm talking mostly from a commercial insurance perspective. I don't really pay attention to personal insurance or healthcare or life and annuities. Yeah. So from a commercial insurance standpoint, I think it's going to get dicey. You're going to have a lot of unhappiness probably with, there's a lot of lawsuits. There's 250 plus lawsuits out there already against insurance companies related to business interruption claims that were denied. And so I'm not sure where it's going to go because I think a lot of it is going to be political in nature. And I don't try to forecast politics and how people take up issues or not. Yeah, none of us can. But I am curious to see what happens over the next 6 months or so around these business interruption claims. I think it could get very dicey if cards fall certain ways.
It is already at the level that it's going to be bigger than any of the big hurricanes that we saw down in the South, Hurricane Katrina, et cetera, or even potentially the World Trade Center and all of the stuff that got associated that. I mean, COVID has the potential to be so much bigger, not just from a claim perspective, but just an overall impact and reputation to the industry.
Yep. And I mean, AIG and Lloyd's have both come out and said this is going to be the largest insurance loss of all time. I mean, I think the key is like, how big of a loss is it going to be? Are we talking 100 billion? Or like worst case, are we talking, I think I saw this in the Willis report that came out, are we talking 500 billion, which would have very serious implications for the insurance industry.
And that in itself is going to have implications to businesses and whether or not they're going to be able to afford insurance then going forward, and what will they be able to get.
I agree. And I think trust will be another issue going forward. The next wave of small businesses, how are they going to respond? It's going to be very interesting, is the best I can say.
One of the things I always tell people, having been in this industry my entire career, is that very few people understand how insurance really underpins economies, underpins countries, underpins businesses and people's lives all at the same time. And they're all so intertwined.
I'd agree. And I didn't really fully understand that either until we started negotiating enterprise contracts. And the insurance companies would come back to us and say, okay, and I didn't fully grasp that I bought an insurance policy so that insurance could trust our software and it could know that if something bad happened, at least there's an insurance policy that can help with some of the risk. And, that was kind of an eye opener to me. So like technology, it's a really important concept within technology, for example, which is where we play.
So what advice would you give to insurers and other startups, as we start this new decade, 2020?
I'm thinking through. I mean, there's the self-serving answer, which is don't freeze your budgets like many people are doing. See this as an opportunity to fix the things that you've wanted to fix. Super self-serving comment would be fix your policy language first because it's going to matter a lot. But I would say, just generally speaking, the innovation theater's over, which I think is actually a good thing. It's kind of like the hype cycle. I think we're kind of on the decline of the InsurTech hype cycle. And so now the real stuff starts to emerge. And so pay attention. Don't just shut down all of your innovation right away. That's probably not what you want to do, because this stuff is going to be important going forward. There are still fundamental problems with commercial insurance technology. That's, the kind of stuff that was put in place 30, 40 years ago. Commercial insurance is not moving fast enough. It takes too long to quote, bind, close a policy.
Yeah.
And so we just need to catch up to what the consumer expects and then figure out how to iterate from there.
Absolutely, because that consumer is the next business owner, and that's that next generation that grew up digitally.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Yeah. So if you could pick one word or phrase to describe the future of insurance, what would it be and why?
Question first. Are we talking like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? What time frame are you thinking?
Whatever you want, Chris.
I think the word I would use is different. It's going to be different. And just what that different looks like, I think we'll see. But it's going to look a lot different than it is right now.
But the exciting thing is that we can all shape what that different is going to look like.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Or we can let others shape it for us, which could happen too. And I prefer not to let that happen.
Yeah. I think those that kind of follow, they're going to find a struggle there, because change happens so quickly that following is not a strategy any longer.
Yeah. Honestly, historically, the best technology solutions, the best kind of innovations come out of economic situations like we're in right now. That's the silver lining that I keep pointing to in this.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Really appreciate all the work that you guys at RiskGenius have done to really kind of push the industry along. And we look forward to continuing to collaborate and have the conversations and work with you and the industry to create that future and make it different.
Well, thanks, Denise, and thanks to Majesco and you for having me on the podcast. And I appreciate your time.
Same here. Thanks, Chris.